When you look and see who's being ordained, the reason that the percentage of homosexuals in the episcopacy is higher than the priesthood is because they promote their own. You're not going to be made the vocation director, the vicar for clergy, the vicar general, or the rector of the seminary if you're straight and the bishop's gay. He wants to live in the closet, and he's going to promote you because you guys are friends. In many cases, too, they're sleeping together.
We're going to have a conversation with Father Gene Gomulka, who is a sex abuse investigator, an abuse victims advocate, and more in his many years as not only a Catholic priest, but as a concerned Catholic. He's going to be on the show because there's another open letter that he's been a part of. You might remember Rachel Mastrogiacomo and Lisa Roars, whom we've interviewed on this program, about how they were groomed and abused for satanic ritual abuse. Well, there's an open letter to Pope Francis now that's about to be published. By the way, my name is Joe McLean. I host a radio program called A Catholic Take, where we look at the world through a Catholic lens. I'd love for you to hang out with us. If you like it, give it a thumbs up and let us know what you think in the comments below. Hey, we've been talking quite a bit lately with like Rachel Mastrogiacomo, Lisa Roars, Janet Smith yesterday, and Father Gallagher on Friday about the insanity of abuse within the church, satanic, sexual, both. Otherwise, it's gross, and we should be the first in line and the loudest in line to raise awareness. It's time to turn the light on. Well, a man who's been doing that now for many years is Father Gene Gomulka. I was recently reading your article over complicit clergy. The headline says, "Shepherds of souls or keepers of secrets." Can you just help me understand how actually bad is the problem when it comes to sexual abuse within the church and the complicit clergy that are involved?
Joe, most Catholics, including the media, mainstream media, and the Catholic media, have underreported tremendously the degree of abuse within the church. For example, in the year 2002, when the bishops were asked to report to the John Jay study the number of abuse cases that took place within their dioceses between 1950 and 2002, then Archbishop Edwin O'Brien of the Military Archdiocese reported in the entire 52-year history of the Military Archdiocese, there were only 2 abuse cases involving minors that took place. Now, you have to understand, Joe, a lot of that, during that time period, there were some 1,000 chaplains in the Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, Coast Guard, and the Veterans Administration. So we're not talking a small, diocese. We're talking a large, very large diocese. And so if you're a researcher, if you're a really good researcher, and you're being paid, let's say, $3 million to come up with this report?
Wow.
And I tell you, Joe, hey, look, there were only 2 cases in 52 years.
Those are good numbers.
Are you going to believe it? But that's what they reported. And so, Joe, you see, when the report came out and said there were only 4% of the priests were abusers. And if you Google right now, Google how many abusers are, Google's going to tell you there were 4%. 4% of priests are abusers. That's why they say that, the problem in the Catholic Church is not as bad as it happens in the homes, with fathers abusing their children. But you see, that's based upon gross underreporting. The reality was in the Military Archdiocese, there were 2 cases. We found out now there were over 500 cases. Now, if you see that percentage of underreporting, what is the real percentage of abuse within the Catholic Church today? Father Tom Doyle, myself, we were like the original canceled priests before the canceled priest association was even thought of. So we were sidelined, we were gotten rid of, basically again because we addressed the abuse crisis. Look at Bishop Strickland in November of 2018, when he stood in the midst of his brother bishops and very politely, very gently, very pastorally said, "Hey, fellas, Houston, we have a problem." And the problem is homosexual predation and homosexual misconduct among the clergy and the bishops. And no one wants to address that, and no one wants to admit to it. Because you see, the problem is not just the abuse. The problem that no one wants to address is how this is really a problem owing to what Father Paul Solons reported in his November 2018 report, that there is a direct correlation between the increase in the amount of abuse, with 80%, over 80% of which involves teenage boys, and the percentage of homosexuals in the priesthood, in seminaries, the priesthood, and more so, the episcopacy. The vast majority of the victims are post-pubescent teenage boys. When I served in a parish, after I was ordained, I went back to Rome. I got my licentiate from the Angelicum University, specializing in dogmatic theology. And I came back to the diocese, and I was teaching in the seminary, but working at a parish right where I am right now at Penn State University, a very large parish. And I served with a pastor and another associate. And each of the associates that I served with, one for 3 years and one for 2 years, years later, we discovered that they were hitting on my altar boys.
Wow.
We didn't realize that at the time. But again, the difference, Joe, was this. And this gets to, you have to understand why I'm sensitive to these cases involving clerical abuse of teenage boys, is because you see, those two priests with whom I served both went through minor seminaries, high school seminaries, during their period of psychosexual development. Well, I was in a Catholic high school, Bishop McCord High School in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, going to proms and being in the band, interfacing with girls, boys, everyone. These guys were alone. They were isolated in these Catholic seminaries where they were preyed upon by homosexual faculty members, introduced to this lifestyle. Now, had I gone off to one of those minor seminaries myself, might I today find myself grooming other young men and boys like I was groomed? You see, those priests who abused my altar boys, they didn't see this as abuse, because what they interpreted that happened to them in this grooming was love, friendship. So if I come on to your son, Joe, in the parish, and the way I was come on to when I was 14, 15, 16 years old in a minor seminary, I don't think I don't see myself as abusing your son, taking a sexual advantage of him. I see myself as befriending him, loving him, caring for him, like I was befriended. Because you see, the priest, the homosexual priest who seduced me, is still my very good friend. Maybe he's even now my bishop. You have a certain number. One of the reasons so many bishops cover up for priests is because they groom those priests. And so they're covering up for them. So it's what Richard Sipe, God rest his soul, we lived close together. I lived in Coronado for almost 20 years while he lived in La Jolla. He referred to this as passing the tradition on, creating these really sexual monsters.
What does the open letter to Pope Francis state, and how do we intend to get it in front of him? What do we hope to accomplish? Father Gene, what say you?
The idea was first conceived by Lisa after we worked so very hard to try to convince the Omaha Archdiocese and Boys Town to investigate the allegations of sexual abuse that were never properly investigated. And because of the statute of limitations, Lisa was not able to get anyone to move on this, through the courts, because as you know, the only way that people are getting justice today who are victims of abuse are really through the courts. There are very, very few instances where canon law, where somebody comes forward to the bishop or the diocese and says, hey, look, I was abused, and they really investigate, compensate, and do it on their own. That doesn't happen. Otherwise, why are we having, why are we almost up to $8 billion, in law abuse settlements and so forth? I mean, Los Angeles, they're facing $3 billion now.
Wow.
In law abuse settlements after already having paid out $660 million in 2008 under Mahoney, right?
Unbelievable.
So people like Lisa tried to get justice, but they can't. So that's sometimes when they'll come to people like myself and other advocates and say, look, this is really getting me down. Can you help me in some ways? So although most of the abuse cases I handle involve clerical abuse involving seminarians and priests who are maybe even also reprised against, like Anthony Gorgia, who reported abuse in the North American College, was tossed out because of that report. Lisa came to me, and so the idea was if we wrote an open letter to the Pope in exposing exactly how this is being covered up, especially now when the bishops are gathering in July for this Eucharistic, Congress in Indianapolis. Yeah, they're going to say the Eucharist is the center of our Catholic faith. Well, hold it. The bishops, including Archbishop Lucas, were informed that she alleges having communion inserted into her vagina when she was 10 years old by this pervert priest.
God have mercy.
Along with another girl. Now, remember, when this was reported, she identified that there was another girl who was with her who also experienced this satanic ritual abuse. Well, when the Archdiocese of Omaha investigated, do you think they asked who this other woman was today? Because they're in their 60s now. They're older. So if you say that you were abused and there's a witness, if I'm going to investigate, I want to talk to the witness. I want to corroborate your testimony. But they never did that. So the idea
can I ask why they didn't do that? Is it? I sometimes wonder, is it because they're just trying to avoid a payout? They don't want to pay out any more money, so they're shuffling the deck in order to avoid that, or is it anything more nefarious? Are they covering up for a friend?
It is more nefarious. It is more nefarious. If you read some of the articles that I wrote, especially about Cardinal Dolan, with whom I studied with in Rome, okay? Because I studied with Dolan, Supich. Worrell sat next to me in a doctoral seminar, for a semester. So the thing is, I know these characters. I know them personally. I know all their inner secrets. I know everything about them, okay?
Wow.
And consequently, that's why they hate me, because I'm an insider. I'm not a lay person who sees them from afar. I lived with them. I studied with them. I worked with them. So the problem is that they want to cover this up, because if they report this, in other words, if they were to take this priest, Father Hedman, out of Boys Town, if they were to inform all the parishes, places where he served, about the allegation against him, all these other girls are going to come out, all these women are going to come out of the woodwork, because most of these abusers don't just abuse one or two little girls like this, who are now all older women. Most abuse is never reported. The average age of reporting abuse is 52. So the bishops want people like Lucas and others want to cover this up, because if they find out that Lisa has this case against this particular priest who's still in ministry at Boys Town, all these other people are going to come forward, and then they're going to have multiple lawsuits and multiple embarrassment. So that's why they'll never ask Lisa, who is the other girl? Where does she live? Can she corroborate this? They don't want it to be reported. They want it covered up.
How real is the Lavender Mafia? Is it really interconnected between dioceses, between continents? Is there a command and control structure, or is it just a loose organization of homosexual men in high places? What is the truth of the Lavender Mafia?
I can tell you, knowing, going back to when I studied in Rome in the 70s, that it exists. I befriended Swiss guards while I was studying in Rome who shared with me how they were being hit on constantly by
Wow.
cardinals, bishops, priests in the Vatican. I could give you, just as Richard Sipe identified a list of bishops, you know, who he thought were members of the Lavender Mafia. I can give you that also, even a larger list. And again, if you really look carefully, when you look and see who's being ordained, the reason that the percentage of homosexuals in the episcopacy is higher than the priesthood is because they promote their own. And so you're not going to be made the vocation director, the vicar for clergy, the vicar general, or the rector of the seminary if you're straight and the bishop's gay. He wants to live in the closet, and he's going to promote you because you guys are friends. In many cases, too, they're sleeping together. That's why the report, of the orgy in Springfield, was so revealing. Again, it was covered up. The 2006 panel that was convened by Lucas, covered it all up. Springfield can remind you of other dioceses, such as Washington, such as Buffalo, in that in Springfield, remember, you had the predator Ryan, who was a noted predator, who was again replaced by Lucas, who was replaced by Paprocki. No bishop is perfect, but the problem with Paprocki was, remember, he was groomed very early, along with Gregory, by Bernardine. So, you're going to have some of those people who worked for people like Bernardine, who were, involved in preying on seminarians and young priests and so forth, and being successful in covering up with settlements and so forth. Some of them are going to come out with statements, that may make you think, they're really, really solid, but really sometimes, remember what McCarrick said in Dallas about homosexuals in the priesthood. Remember when Ed O'Brien was tasked in 2005, 2006 to do the seminary study. Remember how he reported that, we should not take homosexuals in the priesthood, no homosexuals. But remember, 2 months earlier, he was recruiting seminarians at the Courage Conference, which was reported by Ron Dreher in that article, The Two Faces of Cardinal O'Brien. So the problem is, you have one bishop like McCarrick, who does a lot of bad. Then you send in Worrell to cover up for McCarrick, and then you send in Gregory from Atlanta, to cover up for Worrell. Now, are we going to send in McElroy to cover up for Gregory? So Springfield was an example of how Lucas went in there to cover up. And so when Lucas was caught, and accused by Stephen Brady, who interviewed Thomas Munoz, who was present at the orgy. Munoz, again, his descriptions were so detailed, even to the length of the penises of certain priests who were present. So, this kind of detail, you can't make this up. In other words, if you were John Grisham, James Patterson, Baldacci, if you're a novelist, you're not even going to be able to come up with a novel that is so graphic and so detailed. So yes, Springfield, what happened in Springfield, remember, later happened in the Vatican. I really pain for young priests. For years and years and years, I encouraged people with whom I served to become priests. I wrote articles. One of my first articles in America, almost 50 years ago, was about promoting the priesthood. I've written in magazines like the Priest magazine. And uh, uh, a lot of times I encouraged young men to become priests. But then you're familiar with the movie The Guardian, Joe?
Yeah.
Kevin Costner, Coast
Yeah.
Guard. Well,
Yeah.
I had a young man who worked who did my confirmation program when I served in Coronado, where the SEALs are trained, right? He wasn't a SEAL, but he was a SAR, a search and rescue. He jumped out of the helicopters to save people
Sure.
drowning, okay? He wasn't Coast Guard, he was Navy, okay? He went off to the seminary. I got him in, he wanted to be a priest like me. He said, I want to be a priest like you, Father. So when he hit 20, he got out. Then I was transferred from Coronado to Sicily, to Sigonella. Then I came back to the States years later. Then I ran into one of his friends. I said, hey, how's Dave? And they said, well, he left the seminary. I said, well, why? Well, you see, the problem was he was reporting he was hit on.
Mm.
And he reported it to the administration, and of course, like many young men who report being preyed on, instead of getting rid of the predator, as happened with Carl Disher, at St. Mary's Seminary, when Pinto, transitional deacon Christopher Pinto was coming on to him, did they get rid of Pinto? No, they got rid of Disher. So this happens all the time. So in answer to your question, I'm concerned if you're a good heterosexually oriented young man like Dave Demian was, okay? And remember, when we're talking about hitting on him, this is not a little guy. I mean, Dave Demian was, really in great shape, So, but of course, I'm sure a lot of the gay seminarians there found him very, very handsome and attractive, But so what happens is, I'm concerned, are they going to even make it through the seminary? So many leave because they don't like the homosexual culture. But here's another problem, Joe, that no one has written about. You won't read this about in any magazine, Crisis or America, whatever. One of the problems young priests have today, if you're a good, young, heterosexually oriented priest, I assign you to a parish, right? Like here in St. College, where I'm living right now, where I served. When I was stationed here, I could go with my altar boys Friday nights out to Dr. Cleveland's cabin, take a whole load of kids in Joe Paterno's van. He always loaned me, okay? And we'd go out camping. As long as I'm back for confessions at 3:00 on Saturday, the pastorate was fine. And I did that for 5 years. I went from about 70 altar boys to about 160.
Wow.
And while my classmates in college were having kids, the church says I can't marry, I can't have a family, I can't have children, right? But I didn't miss having a family of my own because I had all of these kids. Today, here I am, an old man now. I'm back here 50 years later, right? Those altar boys are 60 years old today, right? Guess where we're going this summer?
Are they
We're
really
going
that
back to
old?
that same cabin. We're going back to that same cabin
Wow.
where we went camping 50 years ago. So you
Wow.
see, Joe, the young priest today can't have that experience. So his basic human need to love and to be loved is going to be impaired by the restrictions put in place by the Dallas Charter, which
Yeah.
prevents him from having the kind of mentoring, close relationships. So while I was fulfilled, I wasn't looking for a wife and kids to have because I already had all these kids, right? But what if I'm a young priest today? So if you have a son, you send him off to the parish, he cannot have the same kind of, of nurturing. He can't mentor and he can't be nurtured himself like I wasn't. I'm so encouraged, Joe, by people like yourself and others who I work with, talented, dedicated, faithful, semper fi, Catholics who really believe, in the truth of the Catholic Church and are not willing and are still fighting to try to save the church when they see, 40 million Catholics who are no longer going to Mass in the United States today, who are baptized Catholics. I mean, it's very difficult for people, to hang in there. But I really respect uh, people like yourself who are really working hard to try to save the body of Christ. And so that's why, you recognize that our faith is in Jesus Christ. It's not in the institutional church. But of course, people don't want to admit the flaws of the hierarchy because that can impact their Catholic faith. This is the person who is giving them communion. So how can you, respect someone who one day is giving you communion, who the day before was inserting it into the vaginas of little girls like Lisa?
So satanic.
So the hypocrisy that's going on today, and so you are exposing, this hypocrisy. You're trying to save the church. You're asking, well, how can the Pope allow someone like, Rupnik, who raped all these nuns, who forced them to drink his semen out of a chalice,
That's so gross.
get away with this? How can we tell people that that the Eucharist is so important, the body and blood of Christ, when priests who are doing this are still in ministry and the Pope is doing nothing about it? There are over 150 bishops credibly accused of abuse, and nothing has happened to them. In the meantime, people like myself, Father Thomas Doyle, Father Michael Breezy in Washington, Father Mark White in Richmond, all these priests are being asked, well, would you like to be laicized? And our response is, hey, if anyone should be, laicized, it should be you guys who engage in this abuse, who lead these double lives, in your closeted, parties and so forth. And in the meantime, you want to get rid of us. When Father Tom Doyle was removed in 2004, like I was, by Archbishop O'Brien, he was in Germany. When he went back to Washington after O'Brien removed him, who was it? It was McCarrick who said, Father, you can't have faculties. So you see, Joe, the problem is, when people like Strickland and myself and others are sidelined and silenced, it's only good lay people like yourself outside of their chain of command, who can get away with this by speaking out. If you're a priest, you do this like Father Mark White did with his blog, he's out in the street.
Yeah.
When I spoke out and I wrote about this cover-ups and so forth, I'm tossed out. By their fruits you shall know them. The problem is that there are some bishops who will speak to the camera. In other words, they're interested in PR. They want to come across as being, conservative, traditional, authentic, orthodox. But on the other hand, the problem is too that you have some bishops who may be well intended, but they know that if they speak out, I mean, really, if they really address, these problems like they should, and not wait for the courts to force them, to act, they know that bishops who address abuse, like Dermot Martin did in Dublin when he was made the Archbishop of Dublin. What happened to him? When he opened up the archives and released 80,000 documents to the Murphy Commission, he was never made a bishop. What's the largest archdiocese in all of Ireland? Dublin. Should that not be the place where the cardinal is? Should he not have been made a cardinal? Of course. But he didn't realize that, hold it, he was sent in there to cover up. Somebody never, the Vatican failed to explain that to him. So he never made cardinal. And who did make him a cardinal? Francis did not make him a cardinal. But who
Yeah.
does Francis promote? McElroy and others, and Gregory. In other words, all those who either have been accused of engaging in abuse or have certainly covered it up are being promoted. Look at how many cardinals Pope Francis has created. And
Yeah.
look too and see how many of them are straight. So you know that the Lavender Mafia, I mean, anyone who will deny that. In other words, what people will ask me, say, well, how do you know? How do you know that the Pope has a homosexual orientation? And all these cardinals, in these reports show that over 80% of the cardinals are gay. How can you say that? Well, Joe, look, if you come to visit me in State College, okay, and I say, hey, Joe, let's go out to the gay bar. What are you going to think? So you see, Joe, when you consider who you associate with, who your friends are, who your intimate friends are, that tells you a lot about who you are. And so by association, I mean, look at Grassi, who was arrested, and the Pope tried to defend him, right? With that 2,600 page report, right? Look at Zanchetta, look at Coco Palmerio, look at these guys, and you're going to tell me that look at Batista Rica, who he put in charge of his papal household. That's why,
Yeah.
Joe, if you go to the Casa Santa Marta in the Vatican, let me tell you something, Joe. Lock your door at night.
Phew.
There is a very, very important lawsuit. There are actually 3 lawsuits now involving seminarians that I'm involved with. One's in New York, in Staten Island, okay? One is in also in Brooklyn, and then one is in Rhode Island, okay? These are lawsuits that abused seminarians who were either abused or who were reprised against for reporting abuse are going through now. And if people want to really help, instead of contributing to the perverts and the predators and those who cover it up, I recommend to go Save Our Seminarians. It's if you Google Save Our Seminarians, there's a GoFundMe an account there. Okay, and if Anthony Gorgia, who brought suit against the North American College, where Rachel, had her encounter first, and against the North American College and against the New York Archdiocese, against Cardinal Dolan, who got rid of him, who covered up what was going on at the NAC. If he wins this lawsuit, it will make a huge difference. In other words, seminarians will now be empowered not to be preyed upon or thrown out if they report abuse. If they lose this case in New York Supreme Court, I worry. I cannot guarantee you that any good Catholic straight seminarian is safe today. See, CNA covered it up. They said, "Oh, it was dismissed." Well, yes, the judge initially said, "Look, this is church and state. I can't try this." So immediately, Anthony's lawyer appealed. And so it's in the appellate court now. If he wins the appeal, this is going to be an earthquake, because the amount of evidence we have with FBI agents and all kind of witnesses, other seminarians who were at the NAC, who talk about how they were, preyed upon by Father Adam Park, who is in Washington now, working in a hospital and getting away with this. I mean, if they win this case, it's going to make it safe for seminaries. If they lose this case, I would not have any. I would really worry about every seminary in the United States today.
Did you like that video? It's okay. You can admit it. It's perfectly fine. Hey, we cover the big stories of our day, from inside the church to outside the church to all points in between, and we do it from a Catholic perspective. It's called A Catholic Take. It's a radio program Monday through Friday. We live stream it right here on this channel, by the way, so make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We would be very grateful to you. And don't forget, you're going to want to watch this video right here because you don't want to miss anything.